Australian wrestling was once a television obsession where the best in the world would clash. Now travel halfway around the world with a former Aussie wrestling champion to track down the greats of those glory days where generations cheered heroes and booed villains. Who's passed on? Who's still alive? And how do they look now? Here are the mad, bad and dangerous to know granddaddies of the original reality television, where every move was rough, tough and real. Here is Ronnie Miller. He's in good shape for a 65-year-old. Now retired on the Gold Coast region of Australia, he likes to stay healthy with regular morning walks, but the workouts used to be more strenuous. Downright dangerous and a lot more entertaining. Ronnie Miller was a professional Australian wrestler who literally took on the world in the 60s, 70s and 80s.
It looks like he's wrestling with his mind as well as with his body.
He held the title Australian Heavyweight Champion from 1975 to 1984. This is the story of the days where big men from around the world thundered rage and reigned from the top ropes down under. A time where there seemed to be more of this and a little less of this.
There's gonna be enough gravy for Big Bad John.
You see that right there in the ring? Because we're organized.
For the biggest battle that I yet to be fought.
After 20 years, the wrestling finished. I lost contact with everyone. Then I started to hear Skull Murphy, Brute Bernard, even Larry O'Day. These fellas have passed away. Where are the rest of these fellas? The Americans, the Australians? So I decided, let's find out.
This sparks an idea in Ron. Being a champion wrestler and promoter as well, he has access to classic wrestling footage of Aussie, American and international champions that's rarely seen nowadays, even though interest from fans has never waned.
Beautiful arm drag.
The emails I've been getting, it's really amazed me and it's made me feel good. With a string of phone calls, I started to locate some of the big names from wrestling's past. I was planning a trip to get him on camera.
Ron Miller meets with Mario Milano, George Barnes, Steve Rackman, Johnny Gray, an expat, Jack Claiborne, Larry O'Day's daughter, Lauren, and me, wrestling announcer Mike Cleary. Ronnie travels to Hawaii to meet up with the charismatic King Curtis.
They had the choice of the top talent in the world. Everybody wanted to go down under, so because that was where the money was.
Then it's on to Las Vegas for the annual fighters convention called the Cauliflower Alley Club, as Ron tracks down the American wrestling heroes who came to Australia, like the great Nick Bockwinkel, Flying Red Bastine, the mighty Ox Baker, and the champ of champs, Harley Race.
And wrestling.
Plus famous wrestling promoters, Playboy Gary Hart, JJ Dillon, who created their own mischief in and out of the ring. Talk about their careers and the careers of others, some still on the road, and of the many greats who have passed. But before anything else, what did these guys think of our champ, Ronnie Miller?
The champ himself, wearing the belt from Australia, Ronnie Miller.
Ron Miller was one of the best representatives of Australia wrestling.
Ron Miller is a shy type of personality, but he can get it done in the ring because he's got the qualification and he can take it himself.
Now with a hard right hand to the leg.
I think he's going for it. This is it. The reverse figure four. It sure is.
Ron Miller knew all the holds, and I want you to know Ron Miller went through a lot of years where he took a lot of beatings up from the American wrestlers.
And as I said, one of the things I always remember about Ron Miller was his forearm. because when he put it into your chest, he'd almost cave your chest in.
Brannigan now puts Miller into the ropes. He comes, oh, what about that shoulder there from Ronnie Miller with a body press for the count of 2, and how close was
He was also a type of guy that anything that happened in there, he could cover it. He was there.
You see Ron Miller today is not the Ron Miller you saw when, 30, 35 years ago. He was a great big bloke, about 18 stone, and just as hard as nails.
He wasn't the best wrestler they had in Australia.
Miller comes in underneath, picks him up and slams him down.
Wrestling, you need the different characters. King Curtis, Ox Baker, Skull Murphy, these type of people. I said to the promoter, Hal Morgan, what am I going to do? He said, Ron, just be yourself and wrestle. And that's what I did, just wrestle. One thing, in 1964, when the weekly television program started on the 9 network all over Australia, and the promotion was run weekly, 50 weeks a year, right through the country as well. It gave a lot of Australian wrestlers, and there was a lot of good Australian wrestlers here at the time when Jim Barnett first came out. It gave them a chance to have a lot more work, get a lot more experience on a regular basis against the top wrestlers, not only from America, but from all over the world. Well, here we are at the airport. After months of planning, phone calls, and the rest, it's finally happening.
Coming next, Ron finds those Aussie wrestling legends in Sydney and Melbourne. Later, the King lays down the law in Waikiki.
There's that dive again.
Australian champion wrestler Ronnie Miller, who fought the best America had to offer in the 1960s to 80s, is on the road to locate some old buddies. Here in the inner Sydney suburb of Glebe, this viaduct railway structure housed the first wrestling gym Ronnie trained in.
Coming down here to this gym where it all started was one of the best moves I ever made, because Hal Morgan and Jim Deacon, they had a wrestling school. They taught you how to protect yourself, how to have the right attitude, and above all, how to wrestle. That's something that'll stay with you all your life, and you need that ability. In a nearby open arch, I remember the bumps in my head were an unwelcome bonus from a heavy workout there. You can understand with the ring up here, the big wrestlers in, these walls, they've claimed a few in their day. If anything, it seemed to harden me up for a long international wrestling career. In the early 70s, when Larry and I came back from America, we wrestled full-time here in Australia on the circuit. Unfortunately, my partner, Larry O'Day, passed away in 1997. But on the good side, we're going down to South Juniors to meet up with Larry's daughter, Lauren.
Didn't matter win, lose or draw. He just went with the flow and accepted the result, whichever come.
He started as an amateur in 1960, lives in Sydney, New South Wales. The statistics of Larry O'Day, 28 years of age, 6'3", weighs 16.5 stone.
When I was little, I collected a scrapbook, and every article that was printed of Dad or Ronnie together, I would have this, put it in the scrapbook. Well, we saw more of him on TV than what we actually did at home. So whenever we missed him, either Mum would turn the TV on or she'd play a tape, and then we'd see Dad.
Larry and I were doing very well here as the Australian champions, but we realised to improve you had to go overseas to get the experience and to learn. We went to Florida. First time we stayed there 18 months straight, and we did very well. We became the Florida heavyweight tag team champions.
I would put Larry O'Day kind of in my category of athletic ability.
Powerful, good to wrestle, fit.
Very dedicated to wrestling, Larry. He was one of the youngest that got into it.
But action is aplenty here now as a full Nelson's applied
You
here.
could not have a bad match with that man, you know, like, because he'd make you so cranky, you know, like at the things that he'd do, that and he knew what he was doing when he'd do it, you know, like he'd just get in there and he'd just bring the best out in you.
He was a very rough wrestler, very tough, very rough.
And if you weren't in good shape, you wouldn't last very long with Larry.
Just the crowd goes berserk and everyone's cheering, and they've got their good guys and they've got their bad guys.
Festival Hall, Saturday night, 8 to 10,000 people calling out your name. How good does that feel? There'd be something wrong with you if you didn't enjoy that. As East old friend arrived, it was great to feel the years melting away. We even got a chance to hear those familiar match introductions all Australia heard from the 60s, from an old friend.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, another exciting match for you.
Larry O'Day in against Bulldog Brow, the man of the hour, the 8th wonder of the world.
The man of the hour, Brow of Power, Bulldog Brow.
And Jim Barnett, who was the promoter, he said, well, how about being a commentator? I said, all right, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. It'll be good fun, but I don't know anything about it. He said, you don't worry about anything about it. He said, everything's a lock. There's a leg lock, an arm lock, a wrist lock, a head lock.
Big excitement for you. The stars are still there and the action's still packed. Little talk, plenty of action. Sydney at 16.5 stone. They call him up the Tigers, George Barnes.
Well, I want you to know...
To describe my style, I was a wrestling heel. If you know what a heel is, you know, like a bad guy in wrestling.
Rolls out of the way.
George had the ability to rev up the crowd, and he did it very well.
George could wrestle scientifically.
I think he was a born wrestler.
Irish weapon sends that into the turn.
I was always, you know, like sneaking behind the rest back and doing anything I could to win.
Again, Barnes is back as quick as a flash. Whoa, over he goes.
And George asked no quarter, gave no quarter. Just a hard man.
When you come back to Australia, everybody hated me anyway, so I thought I'd give them something to hate, you know, because I knew I hated the Americans. So the thing is, there's a big chance that they might hate them too. So I just turned American and just and did everything that I thought would upset the people. And you know, and the thing is that I don't know if it worked or not, but it made me feel all right doing it anyway.
I've seen him take on Americans 3 or 4 stone heavier than himself.
I remember many tough matches with Barnes.
It just kept me on and on. And I got that sick of it in the end that every time Johnny Gray would do something to me, I'd hold him down and trying to get in the pin and he'd get out of me, go bastard and hit me, you know, like, and get up and do something else. Because he was prepared to go on, but I wasn't. I'd had it, you know, like, and my legs were falling out from underneath me, and then, you know, so there are times, you know, when you say wrestling's fake, well, I wanted to fake at that time because I was so damn tired and I just wanted to go home, you know, like.
Claiborne, there it is, there's Jack Claiborne for you.
I started in France, and from there on all over Europe, England.
Now under right up there, lifting the arm, brings Larry O'Day.
Jack Claiborne. I first met him when I was in New Zealand. What a great wrestler.
He turned pro in 1964 from amateur wrestling in the gymnast at school when he was a young lad. But his body certainly.
I reckon he wrote the book on wrestling. You know, he knew just about every hold, every configuration of a hold, and every wrist lock.
Claiborne beautifully built around the diaphragm. He bridges now, and O'Day will possibly try and show his strength. Oh, he comes right down on top of Jack Claiborne here, and the amazed look on Larry O'Day's face gives you some idea of the strength.
I was Southeast Asian champion. I got the title in Japan and was in New Zealand.
He was a great athlete, in good shape.
Jack had cover. I had some good matches with Jack. Quite a gentleman.
I learned a lot up there in America too, because of different style of wrestling than the European style. Enjoyed it. Fantastic club. To me, it was fantastic.
Well, Johnny Gray getting into the ring, coming in from Melbourne, weighing in at 16 stone, 4 pounds.
I had a fellow called Murphy the Surfy, and it was my first professional wrestling match at Festival Hall, and I got in the ring, and this fellow just wiped the ring. He just wiped the floor with mouth. There was about 20 blokes in the ring at the same time.
Johnny Gray, come through the ranks of the World Championship Wrestling years. He wasn't as big as some of the guys, but he was big enough.
And the ultimate insult for any wrestler, of course, was a boot up the backside, and that's what I got on the way out of the ring. So, in other words, what a skinny little kid like you doing in the ring with a bloke like me.
To be as good as these blokes, as Johnny Gray, and you had to be dedicated to it. You had to have wanted it so bad that you can taste it.
I was the Australian Junior Heavyweight Champion. I was also the Tag Team Champion. I was Tag Team Champion with Ron Miller.
Just, you know, one of the best. He's up there with the best, you know, top shelf.
He chose to go to America. He wrestled right through the southern states, and he did very, very well.
Slams him down.
But it was a good introduction, and I was there with some of the top, Jack Briscoe and Harley Race, and it gave us me a better background for when I came back to Australia, and it gave us even more credibility back home because I'd had that overseas experience.
We got involved with some wrestlers one night, and when the dust settled, I was advised that I should be joining them, not the bouncers.
And Steve Rackman is a unique personality, and he's got the looks to be a manager.
I would imagine that the manager's role is probably the most important from a point of view of entertainment value.
He just had that horrible look about him that scares children, that hangs off the roofs of churches, you know, they gargoyles.
George, next time I see you, I trust you will give me an explanation for that little comment.
But Steve used these attributes well. Just listen to the description of his character Donk that he played in the Crocodile Dundee films.
This character would also require a mouth devoid of teeth, multiple scarring with an ugly face to match with a strong hint of personality disorder. So maybe George is right.
From Italy at 19 stone, Mario Milano.
I started fighting oh my goodness, wait a minute, I was 18 years old. I finished about 5 years ago.
Mario Milano, he was worldwide card before he ever come down to Aussie.
The mainstay of the Italians in Australia. I think he's been here longer than Captain Cook, I think, hasn't he? Mario, but a very good wrestler.
Not bad for an old man.
About to go in the ring, Mario and Hal Morgan said, Ron, you cannot wear that. You look like a barber. So Mario went into his bag, brought out a jacket, a wrestling jacket, and said, here, wear this, Ron. If you're going to be a professional, look a professional.
The top, Milano waits and gets it. He's going for the abdominal stretch. He has the abdominal stretch on Sonny Dalton. And
Abdominal stretch, well, it's the moves, and not too many people used to do it. Tall, you must be a little bit tall.
Mario slips around behind him.
Long legs and long arms. I mean, if you're tall, it's easy to do it. So I learned, and it was my successful hold.
The crowd running, they're right behind Mario Milano as he rips into Sonny Dalton.
And even if you mention the name Mario 20, 25 years later, people will smile and know him.
I'm an average man, you know. Some people, when they reach, like they have a world title for something or big name in the movie stars, they walk around, they look at you like you are nothing. I never been like that. I already felt like I'm a human being like anybody else.
Well, Mario Milano, as I mentioned to you, one of the wrestling gentlemen of the ring.
He always had a kind word to say about everybody.
Mario Milano is one of those names that you get into your brain and it stays there. So there's no doubt about it. Everywhere he goes, even now, people still know him, and good on him.
Next on Ruff, Tuff and Real, Ronnie travels to Blue Hawaii and chats to the one and only King Curtis. And later, Las Vegas hosts the Cauliflower Alley Club and a galaxy of wrestling stars. Ronnie's plans are really coming together, already tracking down some Aussie wrestling greats.
I'm at Waikiki Beach, Honolulu, where for the past 28 years, King Curtis has had his stall. I haven't been here, I haven't seen him for 20 years. He's there somewhere and we're going to go and find him because he's one of the real legends of wrestling. And there he was, sitting nearby his beach gear concession stand, still looking every bit the Hawaiian royalty he is, and still holding court.
From Honolulu, Hawaii, it's the fabulous King Curtis at 22 stone.
I come down to Australia the first time for George Gardner before Jim Barnett got there. And I come down there in about 60.
King Curtis would have to be the absolute promoter's dream. He had it all. Personality, charisma, wrestling talent.
Before Jim Barnett came down there in 1963, He was the biggest promoter in the United States.
If you wanted to be big, you had to go to Australia. You know, if you go to Australia and you become big in Australia, then all the promoters here wanted you.
So the 10, 12 guys he had in there at any time could have gone anywhere in the world and got a job. The Commonwealth are very laid back. They're very much like the Hawaiian. The American, he busy, he moving, he running everywhere and everything. You meet a different type of personality all the way through society.
Yeah. Fortunately, in the course of his marriages, he finally married an Australian girl.
And I still have close ties. I'm very happily married. My wife is from England, but raised in Australia.
King Curtis is a happy individual, a man who derives much pleasure out of life. He lives every day to the full.
You know, they call him King Curtis because his great-grandfather was a king of the Hawaii.
King Curtis, probably one of the greatest attractions of all time.
He's one of the first great wrestlers with an interview. And of course, people understand that with television, an interview is very important. He had it all.
It really must be a difficult job for you.
He go, and away he'd go. It wouldn't matter what you asked him, he'd say whatever he wanted to say.
I almost lost an eye, and Lewin almost lost half of his face.
He, for all intents and purposes, brought back the intensity of the interview.
For the biggest battles that are yet to be fought, and the greatest chapter in history.
And I said, you got about 4 minutes or 10 minutes. And you know, what do you want to take? He says, I'll take the 10 minutes.
No peace, no harmony, until we destroy Big Bad John.
And we were all standing there like that. Our jaws dropped down. He had what an interview he gave.
As luck would have it, Curtis had the patio above me with a large balcony, and I'm down here with a small balcony. And every morning, Curtis would come out on his balcony, take deep breaths of air overlooking the beautiful harbor bridge in the Opera House, and he would fill his lungs and say, I can see all the way to Kathmandu from here, and look down and say, how's the peasants down there? Curtis was a fabulous trip. I had nothing but great times, and still a dear friend to this day.
There was a wrestling match between King Curtis and Mark Lewin, and somehow it ended outside of Festival Hall into the street. And there was this unsuspecting man going past in his Volkswagen, and what happened, all of a sudden, because the crowd came out, he couldn't move, and Lewin body slammed this King Curtis on top of this man's Volkswagen, and then got on top. They actually destroyed the Volkswagen in the street, and the car was a write-off, and this poor man was just driving by the door.
You could bring Curtis in any time, put him on any wrestling program, especially the big ones, and you were halfway there to draw in a crowd.
If there was a King Curtis that Vince could have on TV in this year, he'd be magic. He'd be drawing money everywhere.
And now that Ron Miller is here, I've waited a long time, and I really feel Larry around us, and I feel all the Aussies, Americans, and Australians that were involved in WCW from 1963 to 1973. So, brother, you got a lei from my wife. Now I give you my lei. This is the royal flower. That's all.
Still to come, it's glittering Las Vegas and the Cauliflower Alley Convention, where Ronnie Miller is reunited with some of his old buddies who just happen to be American wrestling legends. Ron's quest to track down his old wrestling mates culminates here in Las Vegas.
Here we are in downtown Las Vegas. It's been a long trip, but it's going to be worth it. And next day, who's the first person I run into? But that unmistakable face and giant frame of Ox Baker.
A lot of people ask me about wrestling today. I said with the gimmicks, the swearing, the broken tables, that was never Ox Baker's way. I've got the old-time wrestling blue.
The Plaza Hotel, Las Vegas, home of the 41st Annual Cauliflower Alley Club Convention.
Well, it started in 1965 by a wrestler, actor, Iron Mike Mazurki.
They look after all the old wrestlers because many of them, we talked about this, well, same as any sport. Some fall on hard times, and the Cauliflower Alley Club has a reunion every year, keeps in touch with all the wrestlers, and they raise money to help these people out.
These guys that haven't seen each other in 10, 15, 20 years, they come together and wham.
Swap stories, have a couple of beers, the stories get bigger, longer, harder, better. They're all superheroes, but it's great, and they're all there for a good cause.
Every once in a while, someone comes out of the woodwork, you know, that you haven't seen for 10, 15, 20 years maybe, you know. That's what's really great about it.
Introducing in the red corner from Missouri, in America, Ox Baker, managed by J.J. Dillon.
You know, when I was 25, I used to go in the bar and say, give me the 6 toughest guys I want to beat them up, right? And I said, Luthez, I said, you know, you're an old man. Just let me beat you up and take your belt away from me, right? Got into the ring. You see that woman in the front row with the big... I said, what? I turned my head and the elbow hit me. Boom. 3 teeth come out of my mouth, right? The hand come upside of my jaw. 2 more teeth. Another elbow. Spit out a couple more teeth. Got into the dressing room. Hey, Mr. Thez, I said, I was just lipping off. You know, I'm just a young punk kid. He said, I knew you was kidding me, Ox Baker. I said, you knew I was kidding? You knocked out 6 of my teeth? He said, big boy, you got to learn in this business like everybody else.
The biggest, ugliest guy I ever seen would catch all the pretty whiteies. Not only Aussie or Georgia, wherever he went, with the different color, pink, you get him with the pink toenails, and then he get him with that personality. And he should have been there in the hotel lobbies. He looked like the Pied Piper, big ox coming through, and all these little whiteies following him around. It was ridiculous. I even got hot about it.
He is one of the real personalities which had the charisma. Put him with a Curtis, Brute Bernard, Skull Murphy, this type of thing. He just had that presence in the ring which people wanted to come and see.
Ox, you was a character in that ring. You had your own gimmick, but you know what you was, Ox Baker? You was one of the boys.
I was a good, but in a sense, certain mediocrity to me. And then I decided to become what I classified as a intellectual villain. And then,
It's heavyweight champion, and there is the hands being raised. Harley Race, world champion.
To me, it was an absolute highlight of my career to wrestle a talent like Harley Race.
One of the great gentlemen of wrestling of all time.
Either let me go ahead and really hurt him, or just start trying to break him in. That's how Ox Baker got in the wrestling business.
We had 17 people in the audience. He went out there and had a 1-hour match. You know, he always did his suplexes, he did his body slam outside on the concrete floor, you know. He came into the dressing room, and I'm sitting there, I'm amazed, you know, I got that look on. He said, what's wrong? I said, you got 17 people out there, and you wrestled like you're wrestling in front of Madison Square Garden. He said, Ox Baker, and I want Harley Race to know why I love him. He said, them 17 people all paid to get in. They needed their money's worth, too.
Wrestling on a worldwide gamut is pretty similar. There's only so many different things that you can do. But the Aussies had it down damn well.
You take Harley Race, and we call it the American icon. There are very few from his category that fit in there.
And later on, as I went over there as world's champion, I had one of the roughest weeks I've ever had in my career.
Well, Kevin Martin was to wrestle Harley Race today, and that incident in the tag team match, Kevin, what, he injured his shoulder?
He has. He's not seriously injured, but he's certainly not. Certainly not up to.
What happens now? Do we forfeit the match to the world champion?
I've got no other alternative but to forfeit the match, and the winner, of course, will be Harley Race.
Just a minute, Ref. Teddy.
Ron Miller.
I'll wrestle Harley Race.
Well, there you are. So that's
What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Miller? I'm not that stupid, you know. Ron was a finesse type wrestler. He pushed you, putting you in a position to screw up for yourself.
Well, you can see what's happened. Harley Race has refused now. Harley Race he's taken his World Championship belt off and he's moving straight into action. Ronnie Miller, the Australian champion. Harley Race, the current NWA World Champion, and the match is underway. He refused to accept the match with Ronnie Miller, humiliated, not into wrestling Miller. He's thrown his coat off. It's the Miller and Race. Race hits the canvas. Ronnie Miller moves into action, picks up Race, a body slam, body press, the count of 2. And there's a chop, and Miller moves in. Back to the jaw of Harley Race, and the crowd want more. There's a vertical suplex taken over. Stands there and dives. The body press is dives of Ron Miller.
Anything that happened in there, he could cover it. He was there.
And now takes Miller over top of the ropes and races out with him. Out on the steel front.
It's just a shame that he didn't make it over to the States at the same time he was on top in Australia, because he'd been a worldwide guy then.
Moves over. There's that dive again, a flying body press. And the count of 2. I can't believe it! Ronnie Miller, the Australian champion, has defeated the NWA. Harley Race has been defeated by the Australian heavyweight champion in Ron Miller.
I respect your ability in the ring till now, but I bloody well pinned you, didn't I? Miller, I'm coming back! You have insulted the world heavyweight champion!
Harley now has gone back to what he believes wrestling should be. He's teaching all the young people wrestling basics. He's got a wrestling school, WLW, and his slogan is, "Shut up and wrestle." And that sums up Harley pretty good. But where would a flamboyant wrestler be without an equally flamboyant, hands-on manager?
The first person that I brought to Australia was a mask wrestler by the name of Don Jardine, named the Spoiler. I brought Brute Bernard, Skull Murphy, Bulldog Brower, Ivan Koloff.
He's another one of the managers that come here through the early 60s. And Gary Hart once again had the talent to be a good talker on television. And the way he dressed, I don't know what it was, but people didn't like him at all. They hated him. They want to see him get knocked down or dragged through or into the ring.
Some kids want to be in the circus or want to be cowboys, and I just decided wrestling was what I wanted to do, and I never stopped chasing my dream.
J.J. Dillon, mostly famous as a manager. He had a good wrestling brain, and he worked in many of the wrestling offices around the world.
When I managed Ox, and then before I left, which was right before the end of that season, Dick Bulldog Brower, who had been a big card in Australia one time too, came over, and I also managed him. And
the first time he ever came to Australia, he was in brilliant shape. And you know, when you're an ex-US Marine, you certainly know how to take care of you. And Bulldog did. And again, Bulldog was one of those blokes that you didn't mess around with. If he didn't like you, you were in real strife.
It was vicious in the ring, but outside it wasn't too bad.
With no effort at all, he swoops up.
Ron Miller and Larry O'Day were looking for some help in Australia and looking for talent, and talked to Brute Bernard, and you know, he was a big card there at one time, and Brute was always somebody that gave you everything that he had.
Brute Bernard, who was a great character, and he used to play his part whenever any of the spectators were around or anything.
Bruiser Brody was there right before. Actually, Bruiser came back, Brody came back, and then Brute Bernard and I came in, so there was kind of an overlap there.
He was tough. When he hit you, you knew you got hit. You know, you wonder how this guy sneaked. But Brody was one of the true gentlemen.
Big Bad John one day gave me a clip under the ear. I'm in the middle of an interview and he's gone whack. Cut to a commercial break. So I went to a commercial break and I said, "What'd you do that for?" He said, "Well, we had to do it. We had to do it because that was part of the show. I had to make you. I couldn't stand what you were saying to me. I had to hit you."
Big Bad John and I, he was again not so much a wrestler, but he was a big man, But he was more a brawler, but he had one of the best interviews that you could possibly get.
When they scrape up the pieces, they scrape up the pieces, now plant them in those graves.
So I wove through the entire history of modern wrestling from a unique perspective, really on the inside with managers. So I saw a lot of Australia, and what I remember most was the Australian people.
He liked to be a manager, so you could put JJ in the corner or do an interview for a wrestler, and the wrestler was made.
I was very fortunate. I represented a lot of good wrestlers in Australia.
Coming next, the good and hard times of a pro wrestler.
When you move to another territory, as Larry and I did, you don't just walk in and say, "Hi, I'm Ron, this is Larry, we'll be wrestling main event next week." It's not that simple. When we went to Florida, they took us down the gym just for a month. A couple of gorillas, they try you out, see what you are. Can you defend yourself? This type of thing. Do you deserve a license? Then from there, if they're satisfied, they'll send you out. They'll give you a booking. It looks like a map of America, but you do the small towns, you wrestle against some experienced guys, and they check you right out and see if you're good enough. Then from there, if you've got the right attitude, the talent, and the ability, they'll start to give you a bit of push, and we did very well. The fact that we were Australians helped a lot.
If I have any criticism of the Australian fans, okay, they really didn't want to see their own. They wanted to see Americans. And I think in a lot of ways that hurt the local Australian guys.
The style in the United States was leaned towards showmanship. The style in Australia is based on England, where wrestling's the name of the game.
We just were not tuned on our little computers to that many moves and that mentality and psychology to the match. So with it, we brought the American style, which, needless to say, became a very big hit.
They were a little bit more commercial on us. They were used to the camera, brought out their personality and the charisma, the way they used to dress up, like Murphy the Magnificent. But now for wrestling ability, the Australians were right up there with anyone in the world. Anyone that went overseas, America, Australia, wherever, did very well.
Wrestle the rough style. You had to hit hard, you had to kick hard, because you guys know the Australians are an outdoor lot. They like the beach, they like their soccer, they like their rugby, and they don't like pansy anything. And if you didn't get out there and you didn't kick some ass, they would let you know. I mean, they worked hard for their dollar, and they like a few beers and a nice fight, you know?
I really love it. It's really a challenge to me. There are some of the best wrestlers in the world right here in Australia.
Every day of the week, we're in a different state of Australia.
They wrestled 6 out of 7 days, and if they could have got 7 days in there, they would have done that.
A typical week, we always did the Horton Pavilion in Sydney on a Friday night.
We do Saturday morning, we do the TCN.
We would wrestle in Melbourne on Saturday night, and then Sunday morning we would go to Channel 9 once again in Melbourne, and we'd make our TV show there. And then every other week we'd grab a plane and fly all the way to Perth for a Sunday night show.
And then to South Australia at Tiverton Town Hall.
And then Wednesday typically was Brisbane. And then we would work the house show that night, and then we'd do the TV in the morning. So we were on a heavy schedule.
Flying from place to place, you had to train, you had to go to the gym, you had to keep yourself fit, you had to eat right. So it was a dedicated lifestyle.
I actually really enjoyed my Australian friends because they loved the wrestlers. When you went out of an airport, there was someone there to pick you up, right?
We were going down the street. It was a one-way street from downtown going out to the airport. And there was a pub, and there's 3 or 4 guys that just stepped outside the door with a big mug. And I mean, we've put our pants on, but we're still sweating. We're rushing. And we're wiping ourselves down with a towel inside the limousine. And we rolled the window down, and we said to the 2 guys, we says, "Mates, well, can we buy the beer?" And they just kind of walked over, and they said, "Nah, our compliments." Gave it to us, right? Following Saturday, coming down the same street, we told the limousine driver, we said, "Stay right over on that side of the street because we're going to come up on a spot." Come up on a spot, they're waiting for us with the beers.
But it wasn't all free beers and cheers. There were some nights and some incidents many wrestlers would rather forget.
I had one old woman at the ring there. She was sitting there with a paper cup in front of her, full of chewing tobacco that she'd been spitting into, and I had the unfortunate luck to fall out in the ring in front of her, and she tipped it all over me. It was all running down my head and all, and oh no, it was running my mouth, and oh, it was horrible.
What room are you in at the hotel? Of course, I foolishly wound the window down to tell her. The next minute, there's a bucket of vomit, human waste, whatever.
And on the way to the dressing room, a guy bent a chair over my head, put 23 stitches in the back of my head. Right?
Big Bad John unfortunately met with some bad times in America, and one night in a bar, he got into a bit of a scrap, and someone shot him in the back and killed him.
And the ones that cut you and hit you are cowards. They don't do it face to face, right? Turn your back, I'll hit you with a chair, right?
Still to come on Ruff, Tuff and Real, the awards are handed out and Harley Race receives traditional wrestling's highest honour. Even today, some say, is it real or is it fake? It's ballroom dancing. One leads, the other follows. If you can't dance, you get hurt. If I take your arm, you give it to me. If you fight me for the arm, well, you're going to get hurt, and that's the way it is.
Could somebody please come and help him? No, please. His back is injured.
Many times I have been picked up and shaken like a rag doll and driven into the canvas and spent weeks recuperating. You know.
The injuries are all very real. I've broken both legs at different times.
Neck injuries.
Spinal and brain injury.
The word from Johnny Gray.
Oh, I have a few bit injuries in my back, spine.
My neck is fused.
Shoulder dislocation, elbow dislocation, but of course, the main one is your knees.
Comes down a slow. Dennis rolls out of the way.
The knees don't bend much more than that.
If you see any wrestlers up there in their 60s, they all look like mechanical men. They've all been renovated.
There was always a question, was it real blood? I can assure you it was real blood. I lost pints of it, you know.
Life after wrestling, for me, is not too bad. I always mention Larry. He was my partner in wrestling and in business. We kept involved, so that got us through, because it's not easy to get off the merry-go-round.
Cauliflower Alley Club convention concludes with a banquet and awards program where many fighters are honoured. This year's recipient of the coveted I Mike Mazurki's award was the deserving American icon of wrestling, Harley Race. A great night, wrapping up a great journey. And reminding us once again of those heroes who are no longer with us.
Wallaby's fighting Balloon, but Wallaby's been picked up. Oh, the brain.
One thing about wrestling, no matter who you mention, we're all a big family. If somebody gets hurt in wrestling, we all hurt, right? A friend of mine gets killed, I try to remember them, right? And like I said, the great compliment you can pay, right? Ron Miller is one of the boys. Larry O'Day, one of the boys. Like in Australia, when they say ox, Ron Miller said this to me, you're fair dinkum, right? I couldn't even spell the word, but when you're fair dinkum, that's all right.
But I haven't heard that word in about 30 years. Fair dinkum. Fair dinkum.
We went across to get a little bit of film. We brought back more than a little bit of film. We met a lot of the wrestlers and we brought back some memories. And Ox Baker put it pretty well when he said, it's great to be one of the boys. I was, and I'm proud of that.
And Ox Baker, the hard puncher from Missouri, jumps inside the ring.
Big Bad John and Abdullah. Look, it's Mark Lewin.
Boswinkle goes after him. He's going after his man. He grabs his man, double wrist locks him.
Punches him to the side of the face. Dylan moves around.
The iron claw on Mario Milano.